name is Bruce McCombs, and I painted the pieces you see behind me on the wall. But it's a series of paintings which actually was in the initial exhibition, I think in 2001, in a bigger gallery in the museum here. And it was not only the Cappon house, but it was the MI house, the Frank Lloyd Wright house in Grand Rapids. It was the Hackley Hume house. There's two houses in Muskegon, Michigan. It was the Voigt house in Grand Rapids. And lastly, it was the Maribel Lodge house in about 5 miles from here. This was the first painting that I did of this group, and it wasn't actually related to the group, but in other words, I came to Holland in 1969 to teach at Hope College, and I kind of wandered around the neighborhood to see what was available architecturally speaking, because I use that in my work. At that time, my work was exclusively black and white etchings. And I kind of just stumbled onto this particular view, and I was actually not taking this initially, I was taking the house which is across the street. And I didn't even realize this was the Cappon house, but I was intrigued by the age of it. I think this was put up, this was not original to the house, and it's no longer on the house. It's been torn down, in my eyes, unfortunately. But anyhow, I always was intrigued with this type of distorted glass, etc. But the view here, I think I have to explain how I got to this point. This was taken, I think, in 1980. And in 1978, there was a movie that came out called Days of Heaven. Terrence Malick was the director. And his cinematographer, he and the cinematographer came to the conclusion that the site was way up in Canada, Alberta, wheat fields, and the whole idea behind the story is the harvest. And they decided to film almost the entire movie in what is called the golden hour. And it's a cinematographer term, and it's actually, I guess you could probably say, the golden minutes, because it's just as the sun is setting. And when I saw that movie, I could not quite figure out what did they do. And it was a very revolutionary movie, one of the first movies to use Steadicam, had deep focus, and also they shot in extremely limited light. They used a new film by Kodak that was very, very light sensitive, so you could even shoot 10, 15, 20 minutes after sundown and still get images. And so that's what this particular view was. This was taken late October, early November. All the leaves are gone and it's dusk, and you get into this incredible light which changes every few seconds. And I was so into that at that particular time, and for a number of years, almost all of the shots in the exhibition here were done that time of day. This is probably 1979, this particular shot. And I started doing serious watercolors, roughly speaking, in 1972 on a sabbatical. And as I said before, previous to that, I was an etcher. I did etchings for 30 years. And so when I undertook to do watercolor, it was a brand new medium, and frankly, it was very, very difficult to get started because the etchings, since I had done them for so many years, were at a very high level technically. And because I had just started the watercolors were almost primitive, they were terrible. And it took a long time, and I was locked in to the sabbatical. In other words, the sabbatical, if you're not familiar with academia, sabbaticals are a semester off to pursue whatever you want, you write a proposal. But you're locked into that because you write it an hour or like a year before you do it. So you're locked into it. Had I not been locked into that I absolutely had to produce the watercolors, I'm sure I would have bailed, I would have quit. because, as I said, the difficult thing is when you do something very, very well and you do something terrible, you have no desire to keep trying. So I stuck with it, and at the end of the sabbatical, they were adequate, barely adequate. The way I got around it was, since I didn't know the first thing about how to do watercolor, and I knew I could draw pretty well, I did very, very extensive drawings, like something like this, even rendering shadows and everything. And then when I was done with that, the drawing was pretty good. I just took a little bit of watercolor and tinted it. And then gradually, for the next 7 or 8 years, I would do 6 months of etching, 6 months of watercolor. And it got to the point, the really breaking point where the work really got strong. It was in 89, 90. My wife was working for Herman Miller. We went to Bath, which is outfit over there, and we were there for 6 months. I had no facilities to do etching, so I just did exclusively work on watercolor, and I got much, much better at it, to the point where we came back in June of 90, and the watercolors were on a parity technically with the etchings, and I did one more etching, and that was it. I haven't done an etching since 90. All these paintings here, as I say, represent, I think there was 25 in total, and they were done in conjunction, as I aforementioned, the Hackley House, Hackley Hume House, etc., etc., etc. A lot has to do with the success or failure of a series like this, with how well you can get into the building to photograph. And when it came to the Cappon House, I was very, very lucky. Ann Key was the director at that time. There was a woman named Deborah Ashley who was a docent. And so it got to the point where I could go in almost any time, day or night, and I knew I was around, and I could take shots. And so the shots, as I said, there's 25 paintings, and there's probably 200 or 300 photographs that I used and had to distill down. And like a shot like this, or the entrance there might be another 7 or 8 similar light, similar time of year, different time of year, and you pick the one you want. Other places like the Hackley Hume House was very, very strict about the docents. Some of them are very territorial, and you have a very difficult time taking what you want to take. You want to get a certain angle, maybe it's low or high or stuff like that, and they want you to stay with the group. So that was difficult. The Meyer May House was, I think, the toughest of any of them, because it had just been renovated by Steelcase. It was corporate. Tons and tons of people from really all over the region, the world, wanted to see the renovation. So there were huge crowds, and in order to go in and take photographs, you had to go through kind of an orientation and a film. They talked about it. You know, when I did that, oh my God, I probably did that 12, 14 times, and I just finally said, I didn't feel comfortable if you could send somebody over there with me and so they could watch it. And it got to the point they didn't even do that, they just said, look, we'll take photographs. But that was because I had gone over there so many times. I never felt comfortable when film and cameras were kind of tossed out and digital came in. Because I had all kinds of cameras and telephotos and different wide angles and all kinds of stuff. And also, when I went to art school in the 60s, I was lucky to have an instructor who was a New York City photographer. He was just there for a year. He was what's known as a street photographer. And his way of taking photographs was he would give you no assignments, nothing like that. He just said, go out and take photographs and bring them back. And this was the start. And he was really the catalyst for me because he was very familiar with the street photographers in New York City, which at that time, this is the early 60s, 61, 62, art was as a fine art were suspect. And you had really photographers who became legends later. Gary Winogrand, Friedlander, Diane Arbus, Robert Frank. And they, right after that, mid-60s, late 60s, they started to get shows and Mona and stuff like this, which totally changed everything. But I was so affected by that when I ran, this is in Cleveland, I ran all over the place. And I would go out for 7-8 hours on the day I had photography. And this was economics. I only had maybe one roll of 36 or a roll of 24. And I had to make it last. And it's the absolute opposite of what happened to me when I started in digital. I had to do digital, I do now, because film and processing is almost impossible. But because digital, as everybody knows, is so fast and so quick, you're not investing anything. If you don't like the shots, you can get rid of it. And so I was going around to whatever subject I was doing at the time, and I was machine cutting. I was taking one shot after another shot. I was probably taking 200-300 shots in an afternoon, and then I would look at them, and they were pretty lousy because I wasn't being discerning. I wasn't being selective. And these were taken, as I said, years and years before digital came around. So I can look at all of these and be pretty satisfied that I did a good job. Now, maybe took 200 or 300 shots to distill down to this bunch, but I still feel much better about it. When you start to take shots, I would go into Cappon without a camera for 3 or 4 times. I just wanted to, because I'd never been in there before, and I wanted to get a feel for it. And I wanted to think about it before I went ahead, some kind of a game plan. Do I want to go horizontal, vertical? Do I want to emphasize exterior, interior? It's interesting to look at the dining room, etc., and things like the newel post here, which is a real gem. That's the type of stuff that's at great risk the older a place gets. You say the family that's lived there for generations starts to die off and starts to get sold. You get sold to people who don't have the connection to the place and maybe don't have the finances to keep it up. And they see something like this, well, we can do about that, I guess. And somebody gives them a lot of money, and that affects it. But again, I tried to mix it up, and some were for the verticals, the entranceway, the vertical. This one obviously is the horizontal. I don't consider myself a real purist when it comes to watercolor, because I use a lot of, not so much on these, but when I'm working now, I use pen and inks and colored pencils and gouache and even acrylics, but there's some things you can do with watercolor. From a technical standpoint, that's, if you're after a particular effect, or if you're after capturing exactly what's going on there, what you have here is you've got this light coming through the window, very low light, and overexposing this area. Tremendous, that section. And this is pretty much normal exposure. But in order to show the fact that the light is coming through there, you take like a Chinese white, titanium white, acrylic even, and you literally wash right on top of it. And in essence, you're milking it down. It would be difficult to get this effect the first time. It's much, much easier to paint it normally and then go right back on top of it and milk it down. And it worked particularly, I think, well for that one, because what you're looking for is that atmospheric quality. In other words, this handlebar, at one time, this one was just like this one. But you simply paint it and you know that you're not going to keep it. You're going to milk it out. And that happened here too. this is going to sound crazy, and I'm not comparing myself to him, but Rembrandt was an etcher. And Rembrandt did what are called states. And he has a very, very famous print, Christ presented to the people. And you've got almost a platform where Christ is being presented to the people. And underneath there, you've got all the peasants, dogs and stuff. They're etched underneath there. And if you see that early state, it's breathtaking. I mean, this, the drawing of those figures was tremendous. But he saw that as a distraction for, obviously, Christ. That's the center. He saw that taken away. He was given an equal billing in some ways. So, again, this is a printmaking term. He took out scrapers and burnishers and literally scraped that out. So if you look at the next state, those guys are 95% gone. You can see ghosts in there. But if you didn't know they were there originally, you probably wouldn't even think much about it. But the thing is that he was sacrificing what I think with his incredible drawing of figures for the good of the painting, or the etching in this case. In this case, at one time, all this was literally a landscape, trees, bushes, grass. This was railing, all kinds of stuff, very explicitly painted, but the problem was, it was nice, they were nicely painted, but they took away the luminosity, and the atmosphere was destroyed. Same thing happened in the Newell Post. The Newell Post at one time was much darker, and then I wanted to accentuate the light, so I exaggerated the light. In other words, one of the nice things about film is you can exaggerate, you can underexpose, you can overexpose, and you can get all kinds of effects. And this one here, this in the photograph, this looked like this. But what I wanted to do is I wanted this to be one of the contrast between this and this. At one time, this was much, much darker. And it's just a matter of fine-tuning, exaggerating. And so this is where the term photorealist painting is a misnomer, because in many ways, a painting like this, which the photograph in reality didn't look like that. It was, this is exaggerated. This is much, much lighter than it actually was in reality, because that's what I wanted to do. Now, sometimes you can get carried away with that, and you get distorted to the point where it looks artificial. But that's what I was after.